What we have found, of course, which led us to believe that this webinar would be very important, is that over 2/3 of the Islamic State's global activity in this first half of 2025 was recorded in Africa. So this is an unprecedented rate of activity across the continent. This pivot to Africa comes as the group's propaganda also is focusing more and more operations within Africa, and its affiliates, of course, are gaining influence and prestige within the global IS network. And what we believe this to mean is that this surge of violent activity raises some urgent questions about its capacity for violence on the continent, what strategies will be unique to the continent, and of course the threat it poses to the many governments and of course to the world from Africa. So those are just some of the urgent questions we'll be addressing today. And of course we have a range of ACLED experts who will break down how IS affiliates are operating across different regions. And I will let everybody introduce themselves, but we include Senior Analyst, of course, Henny Msiba, Dr. Lad Sewat, Peter Boffin. They will be exploring IS affiliations in the Sahel, the Great Lakes, and Northern Mozambique, respectively. And to help us understand some trends within Somalia and the Lake Chad Basin, we are joined by Mohammed and Miriam Ada from our Global Data Collection team. So at this first part of the webinar, I'll be asking our panelists some questions based on our new report, which is available now. And then you will have the opportunity to ask questions in a live Q&A. So feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A function throughout the event. And with that, I'd like to get started by first everybody introducing themselves very briefly before questions are designed for specific panelists. So Henny, would you like to start us off, please?
Absolutely. So welcome everyone. My name is Henny Saibia. I'm the Senior Analyst for West Africa at ACLED. I've been working on the region for about a decade and also run my private consultancy, Manastream.
Thank you. Lad, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lad Sewat, Senior Analyst, and specialize in the Great Lakes region. So much of my research focuses on Eastern DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda, and most recently working on the ADF and, of course, ISCAP.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Miriam, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miriam Ada. I am an Assistant Research Manager for the Africa Desk, and I've been at ACLED since 2021. I specialize in security issues in Nigeria.
Thank you, Miriam. Peter, please.
Thanks, Tina. My name is Peter Boffin. I'm Senior Analyst covering for Southeast Africa for ACLED. I've been working on issues of armed groups, conflict, and the petroleum industry since around 2008.
And Mohammed, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mohammed, Somali researcher and Senior Research Assistant at the Southeast Africa Desk. I specialize in monitoring violence by Al-Shabaab and insurgency in Somalia and Kenya. Thank you.
And we will actually stick with Mohammed for our first question, which is that several reports indicate that the Islamic State may have appointed a head of the Somali IS group, Abdul Qadir Mouni, as the group's worldwide leader in 2024. Whether or not this is true, these reports have been followed by a wave of airstrikes against IS positions by the international military partners, notably the United States, of course, within Somalia. And so my question for you, Mohammed, is what is the current relationship between Islamic State Somalia and the IS global network? Thank you.
Thank you, Kalina. There is a strong relationship between Islamic State Somali Province and Islamic State Central. Since Islamic State Central views Somalia as their next regional hub for their global operations. If I explain a bit on what Somali State Province is that there are about 500 to 800 fighters consisting of foreign fighters from Middle East Africa and also the local communities. They are based in semi-autonomous region called Puntland in Somalia, especially the Bari region, and they are currently in operation in the Al Miskat Mountain in Khandala district, and they're expanding towards Bosaso district and Alula district within the Bari region. And their leader, Abdul Qadir Mumin, as you mentioned, is the IS Somalia leader, the Al Qrar office, which is an influential figure within the IS ranks. Recently, Abdul Qadir Mumin was named as the General Directorate of Provinces within the IS network. What the General Directorate Province does is that it guides the general operation of the group in terms of ideology directions and fundings of its global affiliate, especially those in Africa. Abdul Qadir Mumin is also a well-known prominent figure within the Bari region since he comes from the local area. Abdul Qadir Mumin survived multiple airstrikes and operations targeted him and other leaders since 2014, since 2024 up to this date. Also, Abdul Qadir Mumin survived an airstrike by the United States in May 2024, while several other airstrikes by AFRICOM that killed several IS leaders, including one of most IS recruiter, financier, and external operator leader who was responsible for deploying jihadists in the United States and across Africa, across Europe and Africa. Since 2023, we have seen resurgence and expansion of IS in Somalia, especially in Puntland region. They have been based in Khandala, and they have been spread
Hi, everybody. I think we've lost Mohammed. I was a bit worried that actually I was the one who had lost internet. So in the interim, while we await Mohammed to come back, Henny, would you mind if I jump to you and your discussion about the group Sahel Province, ISISP, which operates, of course, mainly in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and especially, of course, in the area known as the Tri-State Border Region, or Liptako Gourma, where the three countries interact. Since the beginning of 2024, it has expanded its operations southward towards, of course, the Niger and Nigeria borders. So my question, Henny, is how do these groups fund their operations, recruit people, and acquire weapons? And of course, are they supported by any local communities? Henny has worked on this now for well over a decade, so I think that the depth of this question will be quite impressive. Go ahead, Henny.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Islamic State Sahel province, often referred to as IS Sahel or ISSP by its acronym. I would say that the group has, since its formation, developed very diverse revenue streams. More recently, as we highlighted in a Q&A, kidnapping for ransom, including of foreigners, has become increasingly important as a source of income. However, these operations have sometimes been outsourced to local armed groups or bandits, while I think it's fair to assume that ISSP takes most of the profits. Extortion and taxation, including of so-called zakat taxes, are also central, as they target traders, herders, and farmers, as well as people and transport companies moving along key transit routes. Cattle theft is another, what I would describe as a very constant source of income, as is looting and exploitation of artisanal gold mining. In terms of recruitment, I would like to make a little retrospect since the time of its formation, as the group really exploited long-standing rivalries between pastoralist communities in the Mali and Niger borderlands, but also between pastoralists and farmers in northern Tillaberi in Niger. Some of these communities include the Fulani Tolobe, but also Bororo, alongside factions from the Arab, Tuareg, and Dausa communities. However, in recent years, as ISSP has consolidated territory or gained influence and expanded throughout the region, we have also seen more and more recruits from, for instance, the majority ethnic group in Niger, the Jarma, also referred to as Zarma, who are mainly farmers. But in northern Tillaberi, for instance, you can see that sometimes whole units are comprised by members from this ethnic group. So they have really kind of broadened their social base and recruitment base over the years from these initial, more perceived as marginalized communities from the onset. I would also highlight that family and kinship networks and such ties are very crucial for the group, as existing fighters or members of the group often bring along siblings and cousins and relatives with them. And new recruits, including children, are, and especially children, I would say, they are really indoctrinated to ensure this sort of generational continuity. And I think this is a broader trend that we have seen throughout the region, not only in the ranks of ISSP, but also in the ranks of its jihadi rival, Jainim, or Jama'a Nusratul Islam wal Muslimin, as we see more and more youths and young children taking part in hostilities or being recruited into the ranks of these groups. But as I said, these new recruits, they often receive Quranic lessons and weapons training in the group's bush camps, and sometimes they are rewarded with small ruminants like goats and sheep to take home with them once they have finished their training, or like Quranic formation, but also highlighting that the group's coercive activities, both violent and non-violent, through the use of violence and threats and pressure against communities, as they pressure these communities to really contribute young men to the group's ranks. And beyond recruits, they obviously also need weapons and ammunition. And I would say that the procurement of such items occurs primarily through battlefield captures, as ISSP seizes weapons, vehicles, ammunition, and equipment in attacks on military bases, in ambushes, especially against state forces, but also militias and even rival jihadi groups like Jainim. Along with that, it also leverages historical pipelines from Libya and Nigeria, which still serve as important supply channels for small arms and ammunition. While locally, the group also manufactures improvised explosive devices or IEDs. Yeah, pretty much that. But with regard to community relations, I would say that there are, as already mentioned, a broader set of communities that support the group in various ways. But it is important to underscore that this support is often enforced, as people have to pay zakat or taxes to the group and also follow certain rules to avoid punishment. In some areas, support is more transactional, as ISSP provides some form of stability in the absence of the state for traders, herders, farmers, and others. The group can provide somewhat secure access to local markets and routes, even though this happens in a way under constraint or very restrictive conditions. But support for the group is also quite fragile, as it depends on both the success on the battlefield, but also the success of counterinsurgency operations by the group's enemies. And some communities, they really comply passively, and others more actively. And there are also communities that straight out resist the group by joining state-backed militias or aligning with ISSP's rival, Janin. And to a little bit of fast forward, I would highlight that since ISSP gained provincial status in 2022 and became the Sahel province of the Islamic State, it has increasingly presented itself as a governance actor through a form of jihadi governance, which is best described as a subset of rebel governance, as the group enforces Sharia law. It maintains makeshift courts, often at the weekly markets, where wrongdoers are publicly punished. At these markets, they also regulate them, conduct controls of products sold at the market. They engage with traders. They conduct dawah or preaching and sermons. And through these various sort of micro engagements, they also sort of embed themselves in the daily lives of communities in the areas under its control. And
Thank you.
I would still, yeah.
No, please go ahead.
I can wrap up, but
well,
I mean,
I was just going to ask on that. In fact, just before you do wrap up on that, one of the things that this shows is that IS learns effectively from either exposure to a community over the long period, but also maybe from previous experiences. So in this place where it is being actively contested by both the government and, of course, another quite formidable jihadi group, is there anything that you can see that has been learned from the Syria or Iraqi context that we're seeing here, where they are, as you mentioned, trying to be a governance actor?
Yes, I mean, that really follows in the footsteps of the parent organization Islamic State, which for at least 4 years controlled vast territory in Iraq and Syria. And this is something that the regional affiliates try to emulate locally. And I would say on the African continent, ISSP is among those more successful in this regard. But it's also a group that has existed since 2015, which is much longer in comparison to the Somalia affiliate or the one in Mozambique, and so forth. So it has had time to kind of evolve, and yeah, due to very local circumstances, it has also enhanced its capacities and grown as a group and attracted more recruits, and also in the context of a very protracted conflict. So we see this, as you have said yourself, the militarization of identities and the arming of communities, as they are really forced to side with one side or the other. And yeah, in the absence of states that are weakened or more interested, or at least willing to cede territory in rural areas, these groups kind of gain power by this relative absence or presence of the state, the administration, or security presence, and so forth.
Thank you so much, Henny. There's a million questions about ISSP and, of course, their relationship to Janin, but I did want to, of course, return to Mohammed, who is now back. Mohammed, you were telling us a little bit more about the activity, of course, in the north area, but also the Al-Qarar office.
Yeah, thank you, Dad. And I expanded towards Bosasa and Alola in the first half of 2024. we have seen them expelling villagers from several villages they have control over the years because they have been imposing strict Islamic Sharia regulations. And locals, some of these rejected some of these regulations. And due to this, it led to influx IDPs in the city of Bosaso, which has been affected by the militants in terms of collection of taxes or zakat over the decade. Due to these reasons and several others, Puntland State and allied international forces launched an operation targeting Abdulkadir Mumin and its fighters in Kandala, especially along Al-Miskat region. In the first half of this year, February, we have seen Puntland regaining control of Turmasale, Shebab, two stronger positions where Abdulkadir established and the Al-Qrar office over the years. During this period of time, United States conducted a number of airstrikes targeting Abdulkadir Mumin and its Shura, or leaders, close allies. Although Abdulkadir Mumin survived most of these airstrikes and operations. We have also seen IS using smuggling routes by human traffickers in the port of in a place called Elayo and Merero near Bosaso, and smuggling foreign fighters from Yemen, Middle East, and also Tanzania and the Central African Republic. So during this operation, what we have also seen is that there are more foreign fighters than the local Somali fighters. And still the operation is 8-9 months old. Still IS is expanding and going towards, from Khandara, they are going towards Eskushuban and Alula, and also towards Bosaso, where there are also Shabab elements in a certain mountainous range called Almado. And Abdulkadir Mumin is also caused by Puntland and local elders for Abdulkadir Mumin to surrender to Puntland authorities, although this amnesty plea by Puntland is not something that's not working at the other end. We have also seen Abdulkadir Mumin and his Al-Qrar office being one of the most profitable IS affiliate globally, sending and coordinating finance towards African IS provinces. So in general, Mumin is playing a key vital role in connecting IS provinces in Africa and also in the Middle East. And that's why the United States and Puntland are targeting his whereabouts and are increasing the operations to defuse IS in this northern part of Somalia.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. That's very helpful. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about Munim in this year and next. Can I just ask very quickly, what kind of a threat do you think that Al-Shabaab thinks the IS outfit in Somalia is?
Yeah, Shabab more based in southern and central Somalia, although they are based in Bosaso areas and they are expanding. Both Shabab and IS both are looking for a way to expand beyond the Bosaso region. They are trying to expand towards the Somaliland regions, and although they are limited access towards the community in these regions are not accepting their ideologies, and that's one thing that is blocking from these groups to expand towards Somaliland. That's the point that they're looking in 2025, expanding beyond the southern and this northern to more on areas which are safe. In terms of Shabab, they are looking to take down IS self in Bosaso and in those regions. There are heavy competition between the two groups. And in the southern, still Shabab is maintaining a strong resistance against the government-led operation, which started in August 2022, although we have seen Al-Shabaab taking control or regaining control areas they have lost since 2022 operation especially in the eastern part of Hiran region. Both Shabab pose more threat to Somalia, the existence of Somali government, and also in IS also pose threat to expanding beyond Khandala to Bosaso Alwila and further north towards Arigawa in Somaliland or the northeastern state, which newly created. They are looking and exploiting opportunities for expansion. Both Shabab and IS pose a significant threat to the weak government in Somalia.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. That's been incredibly informative. I think that a future webinar might have to ask whether or not they are learning from the experiences that Henny just outlined, especially the early period in the Sahel, to contrast or to compete with Al-Shabaab. Let's move on to Peter, please, and of course the work that he's been doing in Mozambique. Of course, in 2021, Islamic State-backed insurgents came close to controlling significant territory in northern Mozambique, and the suspension of one of the continent's largest investment projects, the Total Energies LNG project. Military intervention in the regional bloc, SADC, Rwanda, and Tanzanian activity ultimately prevented that from happening. But ISM has been resilient, and I'm happy to see they have a name. What interest do these countries have in Mozambique, and how has ISM responded to them? Peter.
Thank you, Tlina. The obvious answer to why there's been such a significant military intervention from regional states is natural gas. But the obvious answer tells really only part of the story. We've had two significant interventions, one multilateral from SADC, which is short-lived and just lasted a couple of years, and the continuing bilateral intervention from Rwanda. The SADC intervention was dominated by South Africa, but was really resisted by Mozambique, represented an unwelcome expansion of power by a dominant neighbor with a very long and checkered history of Mozambique, even after liberation in South Africa. South Africa has a large stake in Mozambique's economy, which has long been a source of mistrust between on the part of the host country, Mozambique. Rwandan interest is significant. They've got 4,000 to 5,000 troops in the country. It's not driven by natural gas per se, but its primary purpose is primarily to protect the LNG project of Total Energies. Its biggest camp is right next door to the project. Though its deployment has other purposes, it helps expand its international influence, and it's also tied to political interests that Rwanda has in the region, and to bit the expansion of business interests, as well as the need to keep a relatively large military busy and engaged. Tanzania, outside of the now dead SADC intervention, has a small bilateral force, a few hundred troops, though many more just maybe a couple of kilometers north on the Tanzanian side of the border. Now, their interest is not driven by natural gas, but rather by protecting itself from spillover from the conflict, and a desire to contribute to stability of a province that has deep ties to Tanzania economically, culturally, socially. And of course, it has a deep political relationship with Mozambique. Frelimo was founded in Dar es Salaam, one that may be threatened by Rwandan expansion. So as long as Rwanda is there, you'll have the Tanzanian deployment. But where they all have a shared interest is in combating violent jihadist networks that are operating in East and Southern Africa. Rwanda itself has faced no attacks directly, but it has regional interest, of course, in Democratic Republic of Congo, where ISCAP is active, about which Lad will talk later. And it also has critical relations with Uganda and Tanzania. IS networks in Tanzania have provided support to IS states across the region. That makes it a key collaborator for other states in the region who want to address these networks. And Tanzania has had some success in tackling those networks. And still a little bit outside these more intimate relationships between Mozambique, Tanzania, and Rwanda is South Africa, which remains a key node for sort of funding networks. For Mozambique in particular, both the raising of funds within South Africa and the transit of funds through South Africa into Mozambique.
Thanks, Peter.
So
That's very
in terms of,
interesting.
yeah.
Oh, pardon me. I was just going to ask in this, the way that you've been describing this, I'm just wondering if the threat that that ISM could in fact diffuse into Tanzania and Rwanda and potentially South Africa is not quite the priority that it is to protect, for example, these investments. Is that how you would rank those priorities for those countries?
For Tanzania, certainly. It's to prevent spillover. South Africa is not so concerned about that. I think it's more concerned about continuing to project its interest into Mozambique. And for Rwanda, it's really this complicated set of interests. And certainly by having a presence in northern Mozambique, it certainly locks itself into sort of regional intelligence networks and access to intelligence directly from an active Islamic State province.
Thanks.
I'll talk a little bit about how ISM's Islamic State Mozambique's response to this, which has been interesting. On the one hand, there's been sort of some continuity and change, as always. There's been sort of coherence in leadership, despite sort of shifting operational tactics, because the group was dispersed by international intervention, reduced by international intervention, needing to operate through smaller groups with more operational independence. But there has been this consistency in leadership, and that's been expressed through the maintenance of international links, evidenced in the continuing presence of Tanzanians, for example, in the leadership of Islamic State Mozambique. Occasional funding from Islamic State Somalia in Puntland, and also a consistency in the expression of ideology, both through their international media channels and the local level dawah that Islamic State Mozambique conduct in certain areas that are similar to what Henny was describing in Sahel. So there's a strong and continuing relationship with Islamic State Central, with the General Directorate of Provinces. A change has been in how they have approached their relationship with communities. In 2024, early 2024, they started to try to develop a permanent presence in communities on the coast of Cabo Delgado in Macomia district. That's been as much through intimidation as it has been, but through any sort of popular support in those areas. As prior to this shift in tactics, they acted quite brutally in these areas, and they still subject those communities to extortion, intimidation, etc. But they're no longer directly targeting civilians in those communities in the way that they do in other parts of Cabo Delgado province, where up to 60% of their violent actions are targeting civilians. In these coastal areas, it's almost negligible. So they're trying to develop some sort of permanent presence in at least one or two sets of communities. There's also been quite a change in their financing in the last of 2024 and thus far in 2025. Again, as in Sahel, a significant increase in kidnapping for ransom and extortion. This was really negligible prior to 2024, and it became a significant element of their activity in 2024. And thus far in 2025, it's 3 times as much as it was in 2024, and accounts for 10% of Islamic State Mozambique activity. There's also been, interestingly, a lot of increased activity around gold mine sites in 2025. There was none before 2024, a little bit in 2024, and 12 times as much thus far this year as there was in 2024, which tracks neatly against the international gold prices. So I think that's something we need to look into a little bit more as to whether this is something that we're seeing across other provinces, and how this is linking into informal gold markets. So yes, some continuity and change. To conclude, just to bring it back, not to have everything defined by the LNG project, just bring it back in order to bookend things neatly. Since May, Total Energies has been speaking of restarting the LNG project. Most recently, they said they hoped it would be restarted by the end of this month. In the meantime, IS Mozambique has been really increasing its activities across the province, and we're able to actually sustain for a couple of weeks a small and deadly for some presence about 25, 30 kilometers south of the LNG project for about 2 weeks last month and into this month. And that doesn't present a sort of significant security risk to the project per se, but it really raises doubts about security in the wider district and the province, and raises doubts about the wider security of the project, and puts doubts in the mind of civilians who can question, are actually beginning to question the seriousness of Mozambique's capacity to manage the conflict. Just this morning, there was a demonstration in Musimba de Praia town where people refused to meet with the Mozambican military where there was a large public meeting organized to discuss recent attacks by Islamic State Mozambique in the town and how they could be prevented in the future. And people just refused to engage with, hundreds of people refused to engage with Mozambican military on that, said they'd only speak to the Rwandans. So, yeah, so whatever nuances there are to military intervention, foreign military intervention certainly won't be going away if this project is to continue.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you. And I hope we can come back to some of those insights. Lad, let's just shift a little bit west and of course northwest to what's going on with ISCAP. As the Islamic State aims to expand its influence across Africa, it often contests with state security forces to maintain its bases or expand its broader areas. However, it's also widely known for its violence against civilians. In fact, generally, it has a much higher rate of violence against civilians, especially given its tenure or age than other groups of similar size and age. And the publication of such violence using, of course, IS media channels. So they're not trying to hide it. They're actually trying to really exaggerate and publicize it. A notable group targeting civilians includes, of course, Islamic State Central Africa province, which began as a Ugandan rebel group, still frequently referred to as the ADF or Allied Democratic Forces. So, Lad, our question to you is, how prominent is civilian targeting by this IS affiliate, especially compared to its previous rendition as the ADF?
Yeah, thank you, Kalina. We've really seen civilian targeting become a sort of signature of violence for ISCAP. It's become the most violent IS affiliate globally towards civilians, and already in this past year, there's been over 230 such events. It also makes up a greater proportion of their total operations than other IS affiliates, with the past year, over 75% of their operations were targeting of civilians. A lot of this comes with numerous fatalities. They often try to kind of portray this violence as incredibly brutal and abduct numerous civilians from local areas where they're operating. These abducted civilians are really important for ISCAP, making up laborers, militants, as well as spouses in forced marriages. And I think the surrounding civilian population does make a difference in the Congolese context. Many people in the area where ADF operates, ISCAP operates, are predominantly Christian, making generation of recruits based on ideological or religious grounds more difficult than many of the other IS branches across the continent. So ISCAP tends to use these abducted people within their ranks, and many of them that have fled have talked about this sort of coercion based on either physical violence or sort of economic coercion in order to remain within ISCAP. And I think these abductions have also sort of changed the ranks of ISCAP. Beginning as a Ugandan rebel group, for much of the group's history, they were predominantly Ugandan, even though they had moved into DRC. And now we see within their ranks many more Congolese, and now that makes up kind of the second largest nationality within ISCAP. But further, we have many members that come from throughout Eastern Africa, Unlike what Muhammad was talking about, we don't see very many fighters from sort of outside of Africa, but we do have them coming from various parts of Eastern Africa. As we did mention, IS Central Africa Province does tend to publicize the violence targeting civilians through both their own media channels as well as through IS Central, most prolifically in the Al Naba newsletter. One thing that we do see and we've been monitoring is one, a greater frequency of IS Central publishing these media updates about ISCAP. And then two, a shorter turnaround time between when an event actually happens and when IS Central publishes something about it. So I think this could be showing increased collaboration between the two groups as we do see this reporting lag diminishing. Um, while these events within IS media do tend to frame the targeting of Christians, even talking about clashes with, say, UN peacekeepers as clashes against crusaders, I think it's important to understand that ISCAP makes an intentional focus on this framing. And it's not that Christians are not targeted, that's not the case at all, but they intentionally try to kind of play up this ideology or this framework within their media outlets. I think a clear example of this was a high-profile attack earlier this year in February near Lubero, where 70 civilians were killed within a church. Within the context of this event, ISCAP kind of rounded up civilians from the local area, took them inside the church before they carried out the violence. So it wasn't as if, Christians weren't affected, but they're trying to portray that aspect of the violence really clearly. Another change in 2025 have been the disruptions caused by the M23. And as the M23 has been operating within eastern parts of DRC, ISCAP is kind of making the most of this disruption to authority and carrying out violence further south than we have seen in past years. So as the M23 is operating kind of further south than what ISCAP tends to, where they tend to carry out violence, they've been able to move further south and kind of make the most of this. A few examples of this were around Lubero and Kasege, where ISCAP carried out civilian targeting just days after there were clashes between the military and the M23. I think another important aspect is to see kind of differences between the different ISCAP camps. Around the middle part of 2024, ISCAP reorganized, consolidating from around 6 camps to 3. And much of the violence in the past year has been under the leadership of a Tanzanian national by the name of Abokasi. He is operating mostly around the Lubero area and is often a face of ISCAP. He's a Tanzanian national of Arab origin. He speaks Arabic, so he's been quite an influential person, featured kind of showing the alignment with IS and their kind of Middle Eastern origins. So although these 3 camps do all tend to carry out various civilian targeting, the one under Abokasi has been the most violent and the most fatal. With this 3-camp structure, ISCAP does, and we've seen more reports even in the past few months, of them moving in smaller and smaller groups to avoid detection and to carry out insurgent activities in nearby areas. So while we can see this as a three groups organizationally within ISCAP, this doesn't necessarily reflect how they move on the ground. I think another aspect of the revenue of civilian targeting is really in revenue generation. The way that ISCAP treats civilians is also reflective of the way they tend to completely decimate and pillage local areas. As Henny was talking about earlier, IS Sahel engaging in sort of governance activities, that's not something that we see within the sort of signature of violence of ISCAP. They tend to decimate towns, nearby villages, abduct, and really they don't tend to frame things around taxation or zakat as we see other IS branches. Um, there's been a few interesting exceptions in recent months, and that being ISCAP directly controlling a few mining sites and staying in areas a little bit longer. This could be caused by the disrupted authority and the lack of need for ISCAP to move from one place to another, as they traditionally have under pressure by joint Ugandan and Congolese military forces. So I'll wrap up here and hand it back to you, Kleena.
Thanks so much, Lad. I think that there'll be a lot more coming out of there, especially in their increasing activity within Uganda. ISWAP is last but certainly not least, and thankfully Miriam will be able to guide us through what's happening in the Lake Chad Basin. In that area, the group is referred to as the West Africa Province, or ISWAP, as I mentioned. So far in 2025, the group has exploited the porous borders of the region, following the shortcomings in military cooperation of the multinational Joint Task Force. After Niger exited that force in March of 2025 and Chad threatened to withdraw in late 2024. So Miriam, my question to you is, where exactly is ISWAP operating in 2025, and are they expanding? If you could also speak a little bit about the for lack of a better term, governed community that they've set up around the Lake Chad Basin, that would be also very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the Islamic State West Africa Province, most popularly referred to as ISWAP, operates in Borno State, Yobe, and Adamawa State in Nigeria and regions around the Lake Chad. So there's influence in Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, as the case may be. In terms of expansion, we cannot say that there's been like expansion in terms of seizing new territories, because our data has shown that there hasn't been any overtaking of a territory by the group since 2021. However, we've seen them expand in terms of their operation. For instance, since November of 2024, where we recorded the first drone attack by the Islamic State West Africa in Yobe State, we've seen at least 3 more of those attacks by the use of armed drones within Borno State of Nigeria, and particularly targeting military installations. Now, we've also seen a ramp up of activities by the group in terms of attacking military bases and installations. And in fact, we had much more attacks targeting Nigerian military bases between January to May of 2025 than we had in the entire 2024. It also sort of shows the logistical support that the group has been getting and the way that the operations have been going. There's been attempts to always isolate military bases, destroy bridges, and cut off logistical support for Nigerian troops during their attacks. There's been nighttime raids. We're seeing IEDs return once again. This was something that had left the area for a very long time. And so it actually points to a revamp of the activities of the group. In December of 2024, ISWAP had released a propaganda video, which was an attempt to appeal to civilian population and to showcase its training of fighters, its weaponry, and the rest. And it's important to also note that in most of its attacks on military bases, there's always been a raid of military weapons or destruction of what they're unable to steal in the process. So it also ties back to their video showing training that they have provided to their fighters once again. Now, it's also interesting to see that ISWAP has reduced in its clashes of rivalry with Boko Haram. We used to see a lot more of that, and we've seen very, very much less of that in recent months. In fact, between January to August of 2024, we saw 3 times more clashes between the two groups than we see now. And instead of that, the ISWAP has focused its attention more on the Nigerian military. In terms of finance, ISWAP seems to be one of the wealthiest groups in the region. They make as much as $191 million annually from taxes, kidnap for ransom. They control much of the fishers and taxing fishers within the Lake Chad. They collect taxes on livestock. They also collect zakat from civilian population within the region. Now, we've seen that the Nigerian military, while it has ramped up its activities, we've also seen a lot of insurgent movements between the border area into Niger and out of into Nigeria within that area. So we can see that the breakdown of relationships between Nigeria and Niger due to political tensions and the 2023 coup in Niger has also affected military activities within the region. And so at the end of the day, we see that there's been an uptick in civilian targeting once again and a breakdown of communication within the MNJTF, which we have also seen less of an MNJTF activity and more of the Nigerian military in action within the region. So yes, while ISWAP is not increasing geographically in terms of gaining new territory, we see them expanding in their operations and training. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Miriam, I remember these attacks on super camps being really prolific in maybe 2020, 2021. Did anything change between then and now to see this resurgence?
Yes, for a while that changed. The president at the time had insisted on the Nigerian military chiefs moving their headquarters to Maiduguri. There was a lot of pressure at the time on the troops. And then we did see some gains from the Nigerian military. There was even, it was around this time that the Nigerian military started to change its strategy. And rather than simply focus on the insurgents, they started to attempt to have like more civil military relationships. And so the Department for Civil Military Relations was established, and then the Nigerian military started to do some sort of interactions with civilians in the region to inform them or to educate them on the importance of support for the government. And so that led to a decline in activities. But at the moment, we see ISWAP also trying to pose as government within the region. So there is delivery of services to civilians, evangelization, and just general to show that the government is not doing the things that they should do and that they ISWAP are a better replacement for the government.
Thanks so much, Miriam. That's fascinating. What I'm seeing, I guess, is a much larger group, of course, with IS Central, being able to oversee different groups at very different stages of their development across the continent. And one of the questions that has been brought up within the chat is whether or not there's any real coordination amongst the factions, or if there's competition amongst those factions. Of course, Mohammed mentioned from the Somali office that there's financial coordination of some kinds, but can anybody speak to any sort of other examples of coordination between the IS factions across the continent?
I can take that on for a few of the groups across Eastern Africa. We have seen kind of the financial ties between ISCAP, IS Mozambique, and IS Somalia. So I think Peter mentioned that briefly, but there are sort of ways that money is moving in between these groups. We've also seen technological transfer between the Eastern Africa groups. So certain trainers kind of moving in between the different branches within Eastern Africa in order to show how to build various explosive devices or operate drones. So we do see that sort of technological transfer and to some extent some movement of fighters throughout the region. So I think there are kind of those aspects between those three groups in the eastern part of the continent.
Thanks so much, Lad. Another aspect I think of IS that really terrifies people is the inability of different governments to mitigate their diffusion or even their growth over time. And, a lot of things have been thrown at different IS groups, whether it is, of course, now Africa Corps or Wagner before. As we mentioned in the Nigerian case, multinational task force, of course, considerable domestic police and military attacks. And I'm curious as to what do you think is the best mitigation strategy for the growth of these groups, if any? I'm going to give that to Henny.
Thank you. Considering what we've seen so far, there's been very limited success by, for instance, Wagner and the Africa Corps as partner forces of the Malian state. They do conduct sporadic operations, even targeted operations, but as I said, they are very sporadic, so they have been able to eliminate a few commanders here and there, but not really subvert the group in a successful way to take back territory, because they really don't have that density of forces throughout these rural areas. And they have also suffered heavy setbacks in previous years, and for that reason, it has been very difficult to return. Instead, they have conducted occasional patrols and airstrikes, but it's really kind of difficult to retake territory in that regard. So, I mean, it's easy to kind of shift to talks about negotiations, but I mean, are these groups interested to negotiate with the current regimes that have chosen an all military approach? So that makes it really kind of difficult to kind of find that common ground. So I don't know. It's really difficult to say what the best way is to mitigate these groups in the current sort of context.
Would you say that contests with other jihadi groups is considered one of the most effective ways of bounding IS movement?
Yes, and this has really been the case in the Sahel. I mean, if we're going to take a very specific example, I would argue, and I think many others would agree, that JNIM has really been the main bulwark against ISSP expansion, because we saw in 2019, 2020, when the group attempted to expand to central Mali and eastern Burkina Faso, but as tensions escalated and even to the point of an outright turf war, JNM pushed ISSP out of eastern Burkina Faso and central Mali. It has attempted to gain a foot or a toehold, you could say, in southern Algeria and other areas, and like northern Benin, but these have been very unsuccessful. In Benin, I think they have a chance to come back as they descend throughout the Dosso region of Niger and can maybe in time cross the borders into Benin, but still you have JNIM with numerous fighters that are very entrenched in Park W or the WAP complex. So I think it would be difficult for them to kind of contest with JNIM there, but instead they have done their sort of breakout and instead try to entrench themselves along the Niger and Nigeria border.
Thanks so much. There has been many questions. In fact, there's 60 questions in the Q&A. We will not be able to get to them here, but I do want to emphasize that to the many questions that are specific to one of the countries we've discussed or the groups that we've discussed, ACLED has a wide range of material, a bank of materials that you'll be able to review, which should address all of them, because of course we're at time. But I would really love if Mohammed, Peter, or Miriam were to comment on whether or not IS Central seems to have a favorite of these many groups operating across the continent, and whether, of course, Moomin's appointment indicates that they have high hopes for what's going to happen in Somalia relative to some of these other groups across the continent.
Yeah, I will take that on the Somalia side. Despite the heightened operation by Puntland and the US in Somalia, IS Central still views Somalia as their next operation hub, the only place that they can coordinate between Africa and the Middle East. It's and this due to the position of Somalia in the Gulf of Aden in the next side, and the East African coast on the other side. And there's also room for expansion in different areas. Now they are more concentrated in Bari region, and they're expanding towards the Arigaut, Senek region. And the high likelihood they may be, due to the finance they have, they are exploiting other grounds within Somalia where there is a political grievances, communities on the government side, that they may come back to the southern Somalia. In 2020 and 2021, we have seen 1 or 2 attacks in Mogadishu and Lower Shabelle regions. So they are also exploiting those kind of opportunities, gaps within the that created by the government, and also they are looking to recruit defectors from Shabab in the southern Somalia to create hideouts and checkpoints in the southern regions. So they view Somalia as one of their next hub. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. That is all we have time for today, to be respectful of people's time. But the interest both in the Q&A and, of course, the participants here make me think that we should return to this subject very, very soon with our wonderful panelists to give a deeper insight, perhaps into the coordination, both from the center but also between the groups across the continent as our next area of examination. I want to thank everybody for their fantastic presentations and insightful commentary today, and to thank, of course, all the participants for joining us. And we will get to your questions, of course. And thank you very much. We'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.